some sense in moving from Nietzsche to Heidegger, we have this sense of moving from the dreamy 19th century where, as of yet, not everything was like the railway station where the train must come in according to schedule. Um, uh, Nietzsche, being a classical scholar, must have been aware, uh, however much he was listening to the Hellenistic echoes of the ancient world very attentively, and of course, memory in the sense of coming into conversation with the Greeks play a great role in Nietzsche. Mnemosyne, the muse. But here, uh, and here we have an enumerated break of 10 breaks in the text, and we're looking at section 1. I think that, and Heidegger refers to the sections quite freely. He doesn't say whether these sections were put there by Nietzsche, which I suppose they probably were, but they might have been put there by the original publishers. But, for 2,000 years or so, or about 2,000 years, people read Plato's text without those Stephanus numbers. So Nietzsche, being familiar with that, may have used that practice, but it brings to mind this kind of very mindful of the pressing considerations of textual interpretation, reading into the text, reading out of the text. Is the text there such that we want to use it to do whatever we can with it? Or is this ideal type of the fact of Nietzsche's motive something that we're, just as Nietzsche speaks of going back to the Greeks, can we go back into Nietzsche and speak with him and then try to make this so-called Ereignis or event happen, where in the conversation which we have first and foremost with ourselves, but then with each other, is this where the thoughtful thinking is centered? Now, on the other hand, so I'm looking more and more, I'm seeing more and more in this, the latter part of the first section, and the use and abuse of history. There seemed to be a microcosm of the whole pattern of Nietzsche's universe here. All of his reflections seem to have in this thesis, as it were, this thesis in the first section, which sets up the whole essay, and then is bookended in the 10th section. We have here talk of, after he quotes David Hume, and this is quoted in English in the original, and from the dregs of life they hope to receive what the first sprightly running could not give. We call them the quote-unquote historical men. So I'm going to go on the belief that we can treat the historical men as the genus out of which later on Nietzsche derives his last men. There's an orthodoxy here which we can set next to the old orthodoxy. The old orthodoxy, the old general opinion of mankind, if you like, or at least of the cultured, and spelled with a K, where culture means the mental culture which constitutes a civilization indifferent to race, ethnicity, nation state, all those questions, but considered as one culture, not cultures in the modern sense, which comes in with Boas and so on. The culture where we assume that the move from from illiteracy to literacy is an advance in culture, rather than that there's simply the myriad of stars, which is all the possible cultures, all the possible histories. Um, that way of thinking is grounded in the idea that we are all, I think Augustine's phrase is equidistant. All ages are equidistant from eternity. So now we're in the position which reigns everywhere today, which I would say reigns unconsciously or half consciously, is the progress. We all assume what Nietzsche is saying here. They believe that the meaning of existence will become ever clearer in the course of its evolution. They look backward at the process only to understand the present and stimulate their longing for the future. So this is something I think this is a deep theme here, which is that although there's a general, what we could interpret as a rising in consciousness, Strauss speaks of the historical consciousness, and that doesn't mean only that there's now professional historians, as we spoke of earlier in Prussia, but it also means just what I just said, the change over to this view of the progress and the evolution. And that being, and which of course stimulated by these large views of history, such as Hegel's transformation of Kant, and Hegel is the first one to really do that, and then of course later there's a myriad of people, Croce and n number of people go, of course, deal with that. Here we set up what the super historical is supposed to mean. So the super historical are the ones that don't believe in progress, so far as I can see from the paragraph immediately following that one. But that question to which we have heard the first answer is capable of another, also a quote-unquote no, but on different grounds. It is the quote-unquote no of the super-historical man who sees no salvation in evolution, for whom the world is complete and fulfills its aim at every single moment. This is in a way the historicism that's brought to its highest depths in Heidegger, the way Strauss reads Heidegger. And you think about in phenomenological terms, I think of the example, by one example I tried to give the general gist of it. In phenomenological terms, if you're looking at the sun, the sun is not 1,000 times the size of the earth, it's just what you see, the small sun. And from the point of view of the life of people, the sun, just as we experience it largely today, the sun rises, it follows its path, and it sets. So the idea that we have also we know that the sun, the earth is actually turning towards the sun. That colors our consciousness a little bit, and we know that it's not straightforwardly real what we see, unless we regard it phenomenologically. The question then arises, is the whole of life something that's constantly being corrected in that way? And can you then say the whole content of life, of the life of whole peoples, was mistaken, and therefore that everything must be understood according to the progress idea, and no longer according to the equidistant from eternity? Zizek, by the way, mentions that a real poet would be able to show, or ought to, as a challenge, the poet should try to show poetically, beautifully, the turning of the earth rather than the setting of the sun, because that would bring us more into the reality of it. From his point of view, that would be an improvement, as it were. There's then a third position is brought out. And so if you look at it from this ultimate historicist position as a negative from Strauss's point of view, that all we cannot judge of any civilization that it was better than any other. And finally, Nietzsche quotes Leopardi, who informed him quite a bit. Nothing lives that were worth thy pains, and the earth deserves not a sigh. Our being is pain and weariness, and the world is mud, nothing else, be calm. So it's this kind of bookends with what he just said immediately before, where he speaks of somebody reading deeper emotions into the forms. So we're just sort of, there was the older forms, there's the current forms, and if you don't read that as a progress, but simply different worlds, then it kind of brings you into a position of what Heidegger's calling the boredom, which is you can't get too enthusiastic about it, you can't get too feel too miserable about it. You just sort of like, okay, so that's how it's going, and there's nothing we can do about it, and there's no real progress, and so on. But then it's out of this juxtaposition that he posits his super historical man, which we have to ask, how much is the super historical man the first step towards the Übermensch concept? So let's do that as we go on.